So I think part of what I had working for me is that I've been in business for a good while. I spent a long time putting out blogs that my dad would read, doing Facebook Lives where maybe one person would pop on for a second. So my expectations that like you hang the shingle and they come, those have been addressed long ago. So I knew going into this, like, it's not going to be like this faucet you just turn on and suddenly you're like, it blew up. I have no idea why. That it's going to require time and effort. Actually, I recently learned that you can actually request that Apple features your podcast, like for your launch or for a specific episode. So I think sometimes the longer you're doing something, the more you realize nobody's really just getting lucky and like having these breaks.
Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Welcome back to another episode. Today we have Esther. Now, we had all these plans to talk about being an introvert and getting over ourselves to start the thing. And honestly, the conversation kind of took a turn. But I loved what we ended up talking about. We talked about how she started her podcast, putting herself out there. We also talked about how she uses her nutrition and wellness coaching as a very relatable thing with her podcast. So how long it takes to actually lose weight, how long it actually takes to get traction with your podcast, and really allowing her to set the expectation for what results she was going to get and being pleasantly surprised with those results. We also talked about where her podcast fits into her overall marketing, the celebrity effect, as I like to call it, when people get on the phone with her and feel like they know her, they already trust her, and the call is really just a formality. All in all, you are going to love this conversation with Esther. So please join me in welcoming Esther to the show. Hello, Esther. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. If you could start by telling everyone who you are, what you do, and about your podcast.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Esther Avant. I am a career sports nutritionist, personal trainer, health and weight loss coach. I've been working in the industry since 2006. So really kind of before doing that on the internet was even really a thing. And over the course of the last couple decades, my career has really evolved from working in all sorts of in-person settings to then meeting my now husband who's in the military and sort of putting two and two together and being like, you know what? There's probably a way that you can continue to have a business that you love that isn't location dependent. And I've owned EA Coaching, which is an online health and weight loss coaching business, for the last about 8 years. And we work primarily with busy moms who are tired of being on the weight loss roller coaster and want to finally figure out what works for us to get off and do it in a way that's healthy and sustainable and most of the time enjoyable. So that's me in a nutshell. I started my podcast, which is called Live Diet Free, in December of 2020, I believe. I remember it was December because I nearly told myself, you should wait till next year, and then had to kind of give myself some coaching of what would you say to a client who is telling you, I have this goal, but I don't want to start working on it for a few weeks. So I launched in early December of, I think, 2020, and now I'm 130 something episodes in, haven't missed a week, and it's become one of my favorite business related activities. I just can't believe how much I enjoy it after how long I told myself I'm just not somebody who could ever do that.
Yes. Oh, I love all of this stuff. First and foremost, being able to have a business that is not location dependent. And as a military wife, you understand how important that is, and just being able to make the most of your situation while still doing the things you love. So I love that you're able to do that. And then the podcast, and definitely have seen this where it's like, oh, I'll launch it whenever. It'll be like when I launched mine, I literally had to tell my team, this is when I'm launching it. Don't let me skip out on this, please, because I know myself. And I know if I was talking to a client, I'd be like, listen, you should have launched something last year. Let's go. So I totally love that you were like, had to coach myself through this. Definitely have been there before. So 130 plus episodes, never missing a week. Let's talk about that for a second. First of all, congratulations. That is incredible. How were you able to do that? I know with military, you might be moving a lot. You might be doing a lot of different things. Your schedule might not be what you want it to be all the time. So how do you kind of manage that stuff?
That's actually one of the things that I love the most about the podcast is that I can record whenever I want or need and schedule it for whenever. So we're actually, as of recording this, we are in the process of moving from Germany to San Diego. We're en route and we're in Memphis at my in-laws. And that's a very disruptive thing. We're not going to have an actual home for several months. And I'm just scheduled in advance. I've got a few months banked. And the other thing that I love is, I'm sitting here in my in-laws' kitchen. I've got my microphone and my computer, and that's just really all I need. So even if I did need to record something that needed to go out with a pretty quick turnaround, that's pretty easy to do. And we were talking about before we hit record, kind of shuttling the family out of the house, get a quiet space. But there's really such a low barrier to actually putting out an episode. And that's one of the things that I was really shocked by. And I think anybody who's in the contemplation phase will know how familiar it is to create this giant list of to-dos before you start. Is like, oh, I need the art, I need the equipment, I need this, I need that. And once I really committed to getting the thing done, I couldn't believe how easy it was. It was literally from one day to the next. I hired somebody on Fiverr for the cover art. I found a blog that recommended a mic. I got that from Amazon in 2 days. That's literally it. Then you can just put stuff out into the world. And I think the biggest thing that really helped me take the leap was being okay with being imperfect and just knowing basically everything you do is going to be cringy in a couple of years because you're going to grow in that time and you're going to be so much better skilled and more confident and all those things. But you're never going to get there unless you just start to try. And also knowing that it takes time to build up a listenership. I don't know if it's called that, but it seems like it should be. That in the beginning, you don't have a whole lot of ears on this stuff anyway. So if you're gonna be not great at it, start off when nobody's listening. And then by the time you do start to get some traction, you understand what to do. You've listened back to some episodes, you've gotten feedback, and you start to put out a better product. And I've never deleted an episode. The early ones are still on there because I like to be real with my audience and my community, and for them to see that I'm a work in progress and that everything is a work in progress. So for them to see kind of the early ones and then see how I've grown, I think just makes it relatable and helps people see, oh, you know what? That thing that I'm struggling to learn right now, I can learn. I just need to keep trying. So now here we are.
I have recently started working with a nutritionist, right? And so I'm thinking about my own journey of that and how it relates to what you talked about, because the whole getting started, at least taking some action, doing the thing. I'm sure this is something that you talk to your clients about. That's what a lot of the starting is, the starting to track your macros, starting to track your calories, starting to track your activity. All of that is just starting and at least getting an idea so you can see where you're at, where you'd like to go, what's working, what's not. And so I love that you're able to kind of and I feel like this is probably, I'm maybe assuming here that that's how it felt for you. So please tell me yes or no if that makes sense.
You're absolutely right. In the beginning, any new skill is going to have a learning curve. You just cannot expect yourself to be naturally good at everything that you try. And most of us, especially as we become adults, just don't put ourselves in that beginner position. And that's why I think tracking your food is a perfect example. So many women give up in frustration because it feels unnatural at first. And rather than putting in the work to learn it, believing in themselves enough to realize I can learn new things. I've learned new technology before, and having the mindset that it's worth the effort because of what I'm going to learn from it. This is just a tool that is going to help me reach a goal that's important to me. And the only way I can do that is if I apply it and learn how to use it. And, for me, the podcast is part of our overall marketing strategy. And one of the things that our clients really like about working with us is how real and relatable and authentic we are. And that's something that's hard to convey in written content or just photos. And I don't know if I was really aware of it at the time, but what's really happened with the podcast is our listeners get to know me as a person. And I've tried really hard from the beginning to just build in those imperfections. I lose my train of thought and I'm like, you know what? My editor could get rid of that. But also that is human. If we were talking face to face, I would get confused and talk in circles on occasion and the doorbell would ring and it's all just human. And I think that really helps people get a feel for me. And I think especially in the weight loss industry, I've been a trainer for almost 20 years. I look like someone who has it easy when it comes to weight and body image and things like that. And I think that can sort of put some space between myself and our ideal clients. So I think the podcast has become a really good way to see that we actually have a lot more in common than you think, that I'm not without my own struggles, that this doesn't come easily to anyone, and that I really can kind of put myself in your shoes. And yes, I can help you, so that by the time we actually talk in person, they're like, okay, I feel like I'm talking to a friend. I feel like I'm talking to somebody that I know. And that makes it so much easier to trust that working with us in a professional capacity is going to be even better.
There's a few things I want to pull out that you mentioned. Where it fits in your overall marketing. We're going to talk about that in a second. The other thing is that bias behind video versus audio. And this is why I love audio so much, is because it doesn't allow that bias of like, hey, I've been working on my body for this amount of time. Like, this is why I look this way. I track all this stuff and I take care of my body and that's important to me. And so someone who is looking at you might think, if you maybe had a YouTube channel or something like that first, or they might have found you there first, oh, well, she doesn't understand, or she's never been overweight, like making all these assumptions, right? But instead of, they hear your voice, they hear your stories, they hear how they can be just like you and they can make those changes, or talking about those clients and what happened with those clients. And I think when it allows the listeners to paint their own picture, and I feel like this with books, right? I read a ridiculous amount of books and I don't like listening to the audio so much, but when I can read it, and I'll correlate this to what we're talking about, when I can read it, I can imagine what their voices sound like. I can like kind of make my own picture with it. With podcasts, I feel like the same thing happens where you can explain more of the feelings and how your clients might be, potential clients might be feeling, how your current clients felt when they started working with you, how you feel. And it allows us to really relate on a deeper level than the surface that a lot of the other mediums allow us to. Have you found that like when you've gotten on the phone with someone, they're like, oh my goodness, I feel like I know you. I feel like I cannot believe I'm talking to you, like celebrity effect kind of thing?
Yeah. And it is such an incredible compliment. And I'm a big podcast listener, and I have some hosts who I know that would be my reaction if I were to talk to or meet them, that, you know, you've like been in my brain for so long and I feel like I know so much about you. I just really consider it the highest of compliments when people listen. I think going into it, I tried to be really tempered with my expectations of, I'm not, expecting to be the number one podcast immediately or anything like that. So I really try to think about each individual listener as a human being. And I know that our time is valuable. And you only have so many hours in a day, period. And then that gets chunked down. How many available podcast listening hours do you have per day, per week? And you're choosing to listen to mine of all the podcasts out there. That's such an incredible compliment. And it just blows my mind when somebody says, yeah, you do kind of feel like a celebrity. I'm like, wow, it probably always feels that way. Even to like A-listers, they probably still have that surreal feeling. But I do think it's so cool to have the opportunity to talk to someone who's already a listener, because I think it just expedites the process of getting comfortable being open and honest. And that's so important in coaching. So if they already feel like they know and like and trust me, they're more likely to open up to me. And then we can create a deeper connection, which then makes their entire coaching experience that much better, because we've kind of skipped the pleasantries and gotten right into the actual relationship. And it's just really such an amazing opportunity.
Yes. Oh, so good. So you mentioned overall marketing, and I wanted to go back to that. Where does your podcast fit in your particular business model and the overall buying journey of your customers? You put your heart and your soul into your show. And I want to help you reach all of those potential listeners out there. That's why I'm excited to announce my upcoming podcast marketing workshop. It's about giving you practical tools to grow your audience. You'll learn the secrets to getting your podcast discovered, attracting your dream listeners, and boosting those download numbers. This workshop will be hosted live with a replay available on April 30th. You can sign up by going to galatimedia.com/workshop. Let's grow our podcasts together.
So, I'm probably not as intentional or intelligent about it as I could be. I do have a marketing team that I work with. We do run some paid ads to some of our pillar episodes to just increase new ears on the content, knowing that some of them will stick around, get warmed up, etc. It's also become a really great way for me to have tons of free content to offer to people that, again, will help them right off the bat, get them a win, and then also indoctrinate them to me. And odds are, if they listen to one episode, they're going to listen to more. And whether they become a client at all, or in a week, or in 3 months, or in 2 years, which has actually happened on several occasions, it's just a great way to give value to our ideal client. So that's really the biggest thing. We do, like I said, I'm probably not leveraging it as well as I could, but it's I started out by just like we were talking about earlier, kind of piecemealing it together. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know that I'm never going to figure it out if I don't start. So we always promote our episodes on social media, to our email list. We do those like headliner audio clips. I could probably be better about continuing to promote episodes because it sort of feels like episodes come out and then another episode comes out and another one. And it's like, all these episodes are so good, but they are just like yesterday's news almost immediately. So I think there's an opportunity for us to better leverage like the ongoing marketing from them. What else do we do? Within the episodes, I have a mid-episode ad for our coaching. And then at the tail end, we have another kind of ad as well. And then in all of our show notes, we have links to like our freebie, social media links, and things like that. So we were talking earlier about how it's hard to pinpoint who came from where. So it's like you see the podcast on social media, or you listen to the podcast and then you join social media and then you're in the email list and then you're in the group. So it's just kind of another way to get people into our orbit. And I figure different types of content appeal to different people and different topics apply to different people. So the more consistently I'm just putting out things of value, the more it's going to benefit me in the long run.
Yeah, what I'm imagining is very much like, almost like, to use the word you used earlier, a circle of indoctrination, right? With our content. But really it is like, it's you taking them from your podcast onto your email list, onto whatever groups you're in, or that deeper connection that you're having with people, to the blogs or the social posts, then to the podcast. So it's this circle of giving them more and more information, and realizing also that, and I think this is so important, that people have to hear things a lot of times to take action, right? They could be listening to your podcast and feeling like, oh yeah, no, I know I need to work on this, or yeah, I know I need to work on this, or it's not a priority right now, but one day, but I'm just going to keep listening to her. And then next thing you know, 2 years later, they're like, yeah, I've been listening to you for 2 years quietly from the background. Here's my credit card. Like, that kind of stuff really does happen. And I love that so much. I do have some ideas on some things that you can do for your podcast. You mentioned, making the most of it. And I'm actually doing this, like, practice what I preach, right? Doing this with my podcast, with my solo episodes. I hired someone on Fiverr, and I actually might ask her to like join my team at some point because I really love the work she does. But paying her to repurpose my episodes into search engine optimized blog posts, more than just a transcript of what I said, more than just here you go, this is word for word what Alicia said in her episode. No, she's making it where it's like bullet points and the right correct kinds of headliners, and making sure that the metadata is optimized for search engines and all of that stuff. And I'm finding, especially with SEO being so important with long form content, Pinterest being one of our really big driving traffics, like, it makes sense to turn, especially my solo episodes, into something that we can use in a million different ways, right? So I love that idea. So take it, run with it, have fun with it. I think it's a good idea to do.
That's actually a great idea. And that is something we started doing relatively recently. And now that you've put it back on my radar, I need to actually start looking at the data and seeing, are search engines actually directing people to these? And Pinterest is something we've like dabbled in, but like never really kind of jumped into. But the more I hear about it, the more I'm like, okay, that should be more of a focus. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I highly recommend, especially if people are in the like health and wellness or the how-to kind of space. Pinterest is such an underutilized tool for people, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to learn or to actually just schedule everything so you're not in it every day like social media, and the fact that the pins live a lot longer than your 12-second social posts. So I really like it for that. You mentioned expectations before, and this is something that I've seen over and over and over again with podcasts. It's this idea that I'm going to launch and millions of people are going to come flocking to my podcast, or thousands of people are going to come flocking. And then like 6 months in, I'm going to make Joe Rogan money. And it's like, guys, that's not how it works. Podcasting is a long game. It's like top of funnel, people finding you and getting to know you kind of thing. So what did your expectations kind of look like going into the podcast? Were they set in a way that felt good, or were you kind of surprised by the results?
I think I was pleasantly surprised, but largely because I was very realistic going in. So I think part of what I had working for me is that I've been in business for a good while. I spent a long time putting out blogs that my dad would read, doing Facebook Lives where maybe one person would pop on for a second. So my expectations that like you hang the shingle and they come, those have been addressed long ago. So I knew going into this, like, it's not going to be like this faucet you just turn on and suddenly you're like, it blew up. I have no idea why. That it's going to require time and effort. Actually, I recently learned that you can actually request that Apple features your podcast, like for your launch or for a specific episode. So I think sometimes the longer you're doing something, the more you realize nobody's really just getting lucky and like having these breaks. A lot of times people just know things that you don't, and, you know, either have bigger networks or know how to leverage things better. So I think going into it, I, just like we talk about with our clients, I was really focused on the behavior-based goals rather than the outcome. So I knew that setting or focusing on an outcome goal, like I want, 100,000 downloads or, whatever, had the potential to make me feel defeated. When you don't really know what is reasonable, sometimes that can work for you, that you're just like, I had no idea that was next to impossible. So I tried it and here we are. But it can also work against you, very similar to weight loss. If you're like, I want to lose, 10 pounds this week, and you lose 2, instead of being pumped, you're super frustrated. So I didn't want to focus too much on the vanity metrics. I just wanted to let the win be, first of all, I'm doing the thing. And then second of all, I'm going to keep going. And I know from health and exercise and nutrition that consistency is the key to success. So I just sort of felt like, I'm going to keep showing up. I'm going to commit to an episode a week, and I'm going to do an episode a week, and I will keep doing it. And the rest will kind of eventually get figured out over time. So that's sort of my headspace going into it. And it's been long enough that I can't exactly remember kind of the early metrics. But the fact that, those early episodes were getting dozens of downloads seemed like a really big deal. Not just because people were listening, but also because I was posting about it on social media. And then people were actually doing the thing. They were following the call to action and listening to the podcast. So that felt really validating that, okay, there are eyes on my content. They are interested enough in what I'm saying to listen. And then, if I look at my stats in, I don't remember what it's called now. It used to be Anchor, but now it's like the Spotify thing. It's just been steady growth over the course of the last couple of years. And that's something that I'm really proud of, that there's no plummet when I skipped a month, that there's no spike because I bought listeners or anything, that it's just very genuine organic growth. And very often I'll interact with people on Facebook or Instagram who will tell me, oh, I heard about your podcast in this group. Somebody mentioned it. And that's just so cool to know people don't share stuff they don't like. So obviously some of what I'm saying is striking a chord. enough that it's being shared. And knowing that additional ears are listening to it is really just kind of validating that I'm on the right track. And as much as I've learned to this point, I know I'm going to learn so much more in the next couple of years.
Yes. Oh, it's so important. And I'm happy you related it to weight loss, because I'm like, yes, like we set all these really big goals of like, this is the amount of time and that's when I'm going to get this thing. And it's like, not really, most likely not. Sorry, not sorry. Like, this is not how it works. Right. And I love that it kind of set the expectation before, and having been in business for so long, you're like, look, I've done the things. I know it takes time. I know most people aren't going to show up. And even the fact that you're like, there were maybe a dozen or dozens of people who listened to those first episodes and being excited about that. I think that it's so important to remember, because we can't see the people who are behind the headphones, right? To remember that each of those or individual listeners, and you guys can look that up on the back end of your podcast stats, like go to the players, see how many listeners there are, how many unique listeners there are. I believe they call it unique listeners on Spotify. They call it something else on Apple. If those are your top ones, go look there, see how many unique people, add that together, knowing that that's just a percentage, because it's only 2 players, a percentage of your listeners. And then imagine that many people in a room. Like, imagine hundreds, maybe thousands of people showing up and saying, I want to hear what she has to say. Incredible, right? Like, absolutely incredible. And I don't think that we realize that enough as podcasters and as content creators, that it's like, oh yeah, I'm slapping this up again next week, and there's another one the next week, and I'm just going to keep going and hustling, and it's going to go. But like, when you actually take a moment to consider the people behind the headphones, I think that it really allows us to stop, pause, and say, am I being intentional with my content? Am I making sure that I am taking them from listeners into something more, whether that's a group or an email list or whatever? Am I encouraging them to work with me? Do they know that they can work with me? Like, it really just allows you to think of them as people with problems you can solve rather than numbers. And so I love that the whole setting expectations is so important. Esther, this has been so incredible. Thank you so much for being very candid about your experiences and how you got into podcasting and your journey so far, and helping us really take a step back and think. I really appreciate it. So if you could tell everyone where they can find you, hang out with you, listen to your show, get to know you.
Absolutely. So my podcast is called Live Diet Free. It's on all the major players. And I would be absolutely thrilled if you listened to an episode and checked it out. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram, Esther.Avant. And I also have, if you are someone who is wanting to lose weight and has been struggling with it, I have a free quiz to help you identify what is the thing that has been missing and how do I start losing this weight for good. You can find that at esteravant.com/quiz.
Perfect. We'll make sure that we link all of that in the show notes. Again, Esther, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.